Hello everyone, welcome to today's live IELTS class. My name is Adrian and I'm broadcasting to you from Budapest, Europe, capital city of Hungary. And today we are looking at a task 1 line graph combined with a table for the academic IELTS task 1. As usual, our materials are coming from our websites. For academic IELTS, please visit us at aehelp.com. And if you are studying for general IELTS, then be sure to check us out at gieltshelp.com. That's generalieltshelp.com, where we have 6 full practice exams, all original, same style, same difficulty as the real IELTS. We also have over 100 hours of video lessons, a lot of HD video lessons, and we also have writing, editing services, and a fully interactive course for your phone, tablet, and computer. All right, hi Naveen, good to see a member jumping in. You requested this class, so of course it's good to see you in this class. If you are a member of our YouTube channel, then you are able to request these special classes, which we hold once a week right now. You are also eligible to get our 6 full practice exams that we use in these classes, and you get access to some exclusive videos to get ready for the IELTS with strategy. So those are some of the perks for being a member. If you'd like to use our exam books in hard copy, paperback form, you can order our exams from your Amazon bookstore online. AE Helps Academic IELTS for the academic books, and GE Helps General IELTS for the general books. Hi, Jeffrey. Good to see you in class. Hopefully we'll get some more members in here and we'll get some nice dialogue going for today's class. All right. Today, again, task 1, line graph with table. Tomorrow, we're working on videos. We just did an incredible video shoot today with some for the speaking section of IELTS, so look forward to some new speaking interviews coming out. It's exciting. And then Monday, Tuesday, no class, so no class tomorrow, Monday, Tuesday. And here is writing task 1. Jeffrey, I'm doing very well. Thank you for asking. I hope you're doing great also. Our website's just a quick look. Academic IELTS looks like this. Blue background. If you're going for general IELTS, looks similar, just green background, and of course with different information. All right. Writing task 1. You should spend about 20 minutes on this task, minimum 150 words. That means at least 150 words if you want a chance to get a band 9. If you do not write 150 words, you cannot get 9 because you're losing at least some marks for not reaching the 150 words. But if you have 140 words, Naveen and Jeffrey, of some really good writing, you can still get a band 7, 5, 8, potentially, for sure. All right. So let's have a look at the actual question here. The chart below describes water usage by sector, and the table shows data from 2 countries. Summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. This is a classic question from an old IELTS exam, probably like 12 years old or something now. I'll get a little bit darker so you can see it a little bit more clearly here. There we go. So this is an old IELTS exam, but you could see a similar kind of question as this one, and I think a lot of students have kind of seen this question already and maybe studied for it, so it'll be a good one to work together on and see what we should do. All right, Naveen, Jeffrey, what's the first step here? This is what the line graph looks like, and the table here underneath, that's what that looks like. So what do we need to do first? If you're looking at the bottom of the screen, that will help you figure out what you should do first. Yeah, and Jeffrey, the next time I ask, just add a little bit more in there. Say paraphrase and give detail. Okay, and give detail. So 3 more words, and I'll praise you for a long, long time. Okay, Naveen, same thing. So paraphrase the question and add details. Okay, so take a look at the question here and paraphrase the question. So paraphrase this question for me. The chart below describes water usage by sector, and the table shows data for 2 countries. Please paraphrase that and give detail. I want you to do it this time, Jeffrey and Naveen. So go ahead and do the paraphrasing, and I'll let you know if it's good or if it needs some correction, and then I'll give you my paraphrasing with the details to start off the overview. So the chart below describes water use by sector, and the table shows data for 2 countries. Okay, so let's see how well you can paraphrase and give a little bit more detail. Okay, just start off on it, and then you can continue as you go along. I'll give you a minute here. Think about the graphs, the graph style. Think about the words in the question that refer to kind of a general idea rather than what we can specifically see in the task 1. And a lot of the viewers who are watching right now, I know there's nearly a couple hundred of us in the class, do the same thing. So even though you're not able to comment if you're not a member at this point, you can still try this. Yeah, sure, Naveen. So this is what the line graph looks like, just above the table. Okay. So that's the line graph. This word is agriculture. This is industrial use. And this is domestic use. Okay, I'll zoom in on that a little bit so you can see it there. All right. There you go. All right. So how can we paraphrase that question effectively, add more detail, and start off our task 1 response for that high band score? Yeah, there you go, Jeffrey. That's a great start. So the line graph illustrates 3 major global usages of water. Okay. Little bit different phrasing, but very similar. So the line graph illustrates the global usage of water in 3 main sectors: industry or agriculture, industry, and residential. Okay. So again, you can paraphrase even these. Another way I could have said agriculture is farming, right? So farming, industrial use, and residential or domestic. It's the same thing. All right. Naveen says the line chart depicts water consumption by sector. The abscissa describes the given period of year of water, and ordinate illustrates the quantity of water consumed. Naveen, I think you're thinking too much, too quickly. You're trying to put too much information into very few words. And because of that, it's becoming confusing and grammatically flawed. So you want to be a little bit careful here, all right? Just keep it a little bit more simple. First, tackle the line graph, and then look at the table, okay? Don't overcomplicate. It's good that you're using higher level vocabulary, but if you're using the vocabulary poorly, that means grammatically wrong, you won't get points for it. You'll actually just lose points for it. It's better to use simple vocabulary well than to use high-level vocabulary incorrectly. Everybody who's watching should remember that, okay? All right. So, no, Jeffrey, that means table in this case. Okay, it's a little bit complex, unnecessarily complex wording there, I think. So the line graph illustrates the global usage. Hi, Manisha. By the way, I did see you jump in there. So good for you. Okay. So the line graph illustrates the global usage of water in three main sectors: agriculture, industry, and residential. Now here's how you can make it a nice complex sentence. While the table depicts more specific data for two countries, Brazil and Republic of Congo, and Congo, you can shorten that. You don't have to write. So in this case, don't write the full Democratic Republic of Congo, okay? You're just wasting time, wasting words. Just write Congo in this case, okay? So, Congo. Okay, so the line graph illustrates the global usage of water in three main sectors: agriculture, industry, and residential, while the table depicts more specific data for two countries, Brazil and Congo. And when it gives you the year, always notice the title of a graph. So here you have two distinct graphs, a line graph and a table. Make sure that you read and pay attention to the title of each. Excuse me, I had to sneeze there. All right, so here it's for the year 2000, and that's important because obviously this data is specific to the year 2000. So Brazil and Congo in the year 2000. Okay, good. Am I done the overview? No, not quite, not yet. Thank you, Jeffrey, for the blessing. So am I done the overview? Not yet. Here, I want to add one more piece of detail, which is what we can see most clearly from these data. So, very importantly, okay, and this is for all the viewers, when you have a line graph combined with a table, or when you have two bar charts, or when you have a line graph with pie charts, in many cases, the first graph that you're looking at, so here the line graph, the first graph, this is the more general picture of the data or of the information. And then the next graph, in this case, the table here, is the more specific piece of information. So when we look at the line graph here, we can see it's the global usage of water, and then it gives us the categories of agriculture, industrial use, and domestic use. When we look at the table, we can see that it's not global, but it's two specific countries. So it's Brazil and it's Congo, okay? And it gives us the population. It gives us irrigated land. Hopefully you realize that that's land that's used for farming, so farmland. And then it breaks down water usage per person by cubed meters. So here the average use per person in Brazil per year in 2000 is 359 cubic meters, and in Congo it's only 8 cubic meters, okay? So this is more specific compared, much more specific compared to the line graph, all right? So the line graph is your general, more global picture. Now, in the overview, you want to state the most obvious piece of information that we can see right away in the line graph and in the table. What is that? So Manisha, Jeffrey, Naveen, what is the most obvious piece of information that we can see right away in this line graph? And we can look at the years here. Obviously, it's all increasing. That's something very obvious. What else is very, very clear? Don't overcomplicate. Keep it simple. So what can we see? What's the most clear? Yeah, Naveen, that's right. So yeah, not just by little, right? But it's much more than the other sectors. So we can see that if you combine domestic and industrial, you're still not getting as much usage as agriculture. So agriculture uses more water than industry and domestic combined. So this is the most obvious piece of information, clearly. Okay, we don't need to go into more detail about that. Just stating that that's historically, and we can see historically, it's always much more than industry or domestic. Okay, if we look at the table, what's the most obvious piece of information that we can see right away? So what is, when we look at this table and at first glance, wabam, we're looking at these numbers, we're looking at these two countries, what can we see right away looking at Brazil and Congo? There's a very obvious difference, and we don't need to pick away at details just yet, but there's just a very clear difference. Okay, Naveen, you don't need to even draw conclusions yet. So you don't even have to go as far as saying that Brazil consumes more water. Okay? Yeah, I like Jeffrey's response the most here. Jeffrey's saying that Brazil is just a much larger country in every sense. So there's more people, there's more irrigated land, and there's more water consumption. So all three of these are clearly, at first glance, much greater than the numbers for Congo. So that's the most obvious piece of information for our overview, okay? Now we need to write that. So go ahead, members, write that in your own words while I do the same, okay? So don't look at what I'm doing. Pay attention to what you're doing. Write the response here, and I will do the same. So at first glance, it is quite clear that agriculture, okay, I'm not going to say what I'm writing here so I don't interrupt you. Okay, so that's what I wrote. Let's see what you came up with. So Naveen says, globally, agricultural sector dominated water consumption, while nationally, Brazil registered higher usage compared to Congo. I wouldn't go, so Naveen, that was quite good for the first part. Just in the end there, I would correct it. While nationally, Brazil has greater numbers of people, irrigated land, and water usage than Congo. Okay, so it needs to be clear that you can tell right away that all 3 points are higher. Okay, it's not bad. I mean, you can go and say that, hey, Brazil's using more water, but I wouldn't do that yet because we're going to discuss that more in the analysis. So once we start breaking down the information, then we can talk more about Brazil's higher usage of water per person, and why that likely is. Okay, there's a very clear reason when we look at that table in more detail why per capita, so per person, Brazil is using so much more water. Okay, now when you have a line graph and you have a table combined like this, it's very easy to go over 150 words, and you should get to about 200 words, but don't go over 20 minutes. Okay, so definitely go over 150 words here because it's minimum 150 words, or the question will say write at least 150 words. So you should be looking to write closer to 200, 220 words to get a high band score for this type of question, but don't go over that 20 minutes, okay? You need to keep it within that 20 minutes. So you need to write fast, clear, and only key information. All right. So Jeffrey says, simply looking at the table, Brazil is a much larger nation than Congo, so it's evident that there's more farmland and water usage per person. Yeah, now Jeffrey, careful with expressions like, so it's little wonder. It's a nice expression, but that's more interpretive writing. It's almost a narrative style of writing. This is just expository, so you don't really want to get into opinionated writing here. In fact, what you're stating is not actually perfectly right because the reason why there's just much more usage of water is because it's a much more agricultural-based country than the Congo. Congo actually has a decent land size. They just don't have a lot of irrigated land. Okay, it's very dry, of course, in many parts of Congo. Although there is a big forest there, they're just not as agricultural. Okay, so now we have that, and as I'm sure as you know, now we need to label our points of comparison. Okay, so we're going to start our analysis, and we will start looking at our points of comparison now. So what do we need to look at? So when we look at the line graph shows historical data for how long of a time. So what is our time period here? Okay, Manisha, looking at both graphs closer, it becomes clear that the maximum quantity of water is used for agriculture. However, Brazil consumes more water due to its high population and farming, Manisha. It's the farming. But again, we don't want to get into that in the overview. Okay, very good. So Jeffrey, Naveen, you both saying that, okay, this line graph is 1 century. It's 100 years. Which century is it? So yes, it's 1 century. Which century? So always take it one step further when you can. The more detailed, the more specifically you can express yourself, the better you'll do. Very good, Jeffrey. Excellent. Yeah, it's the 20th century. Okay, careful. Some people might fall into the trap and say it's the 19th. No, this is the 20th century. It's always the century that it ends on the number. Okay, so very good. So this is the change in usage of water in the 20th century by intervals of a decade. Okay, so 10 years. All right. What is the most notable change in data here? So we've already said that agriculture is historically the most. All right. What can we say here? What is point number 1? So if I'm looking at this here, okay, I can realize that there is slight increase in use of water in domestic and industry. Up until about, and as well as agriculture, up until about the 40s or 50s. And then here we can see that there's a more rapid increase of water, especially for industrial and agricultural use in the second half of the century, so in these 50 years. So this would be my point number 1 here, and this would be my point number 2, talking about the slight increase here and the rapid increase here of especially agriculture and industry. Now for domestic, all the way up until the 80s, there isn't really much change, although there does seem to be a bit of a increase in the rate of usage in the last decade or so of domestic usage. Okay, now again, that's globally, right? So I might mention that as third, but that's just so slight, all right? Points 1 and 2 here are quite major. There's a little bit of fluctuation here as well. We can see that. There's a slight dip in and around the 70s. Not worth mentioning. Okay, that's such a slight fluctuation. I wouldn't waste time on that. All right. Now, so that would be my point number 1, point number 2, point number 3. And I would probably mention that in the first 50 years, the maximum amount of water used by any of our sectors is roughly around 1,000 cubic kilometers. Okay, that's cubic kilometers there. But by the end, notice that by the end of the 20th century, here we're using 3,000 cubic kilometers of water, so 3 times this. Okay, so that's important to mention those points 1 and 2. That's how you should break it down. Okay, use your visual ability. Notice the trends. Notice the changes, the rapid increases there. All right, so let's put these together. Members. Again, I'm going to type, but this time I'm not going to speak while I type. I'm just going to type this out. Do the same. Start typing the descriptions for point 1, 2, and 3 for the analysis. And then once I'm finished typing, I'll take a look at what you're doing as well. We'll compare our expository penmanship, authorship, and I'll let you know how you are doing, okay? So let's do that together now. Okay, so let's see what you have up there and then have a look at what I did. All right, Jeffrey, I see the first one there for you. So looking deeper into the graph, it depicts that the first half of the 20th century, there was not significant changes in these three categories. I don't know about that, Jeffrey. I would say that they are significant. They're just not drastic, okay? So here, we're at about 500, but by 1950, we're closer to 1,000. So there is a near doubling of usage for agriculture. All right, so I don't think that it's a good idea to say that that's not significant. That is significant. It's just slight. So careful to report on the information accurately, okay? So be very cautious of that, okay? Let's see what else you've come up with. Manisha or Naveen, have you come up with some words there? Meanwhile, I'll show you what I did while you're maybe sending off your comments. Again, don't be shy. So I've had a lot of experience not only teaching this, but it is part of what I studied in university in psychometrics and my psychology studies. I did a lot of study of graphs and charts and statistics. So this is right up my alley. So don't be shy if your writing is not exactly up to par with mine. That's fine. I'm just always pushing you to get a higher band score. Naveen says, when looking more deeply or when looking deeper at the graph, it is evident that both industrial and domestic consumption maintained steady increase, not study graph, but steady increase until 1950. But after that, industrial usage rose considerably. Both industrial and agricultural rose considerably and reached over 1,000 cubic kilometers by the end of the 20th century, while domestic usage rose slightly and reached 500 cubic kilometers. Yeah, I mean, domestic, notice how I didn't even mention the exact number or the rough number of what it reached because it's so negligible, it's so insignificant compared to these two other uses of water. You could, I mean, that's arguable. We could debate that, hey, here it's very, very little, and here at the end of the century, it's about 10 times what it was at the beginning. So, yeah, if we break it down, arguably we could write about that. But compared to the other two, I wouldn't be too worried, okay? All right. Good writing, though. Good writing. Naveen, I think that was some good writing there as well. So here we go. This is what I wrote. Have a look at my analysis. So when looking at the line graph in more detail, it is noticeable that both agriculture and industry maintained a steady increase in water usage until the middle of the 20th century. Notice I'm using a complex sentence here, starting with the dependent clause when looking at the line graph in more detail. So real condition, okay, followed by the independent clause. All right. And then at that point, agriculture had reached roughly 1,000 cubic kilometers of usage. So agriculture, first one reaching that 1,000 cubic kilometers. Okay. However, after this time, both farming and industry rapidly increased consumption of water. By the end of the millennium, agriculture had tripled its need of water to 3,000 cubic kilometers. This is an important piece of information to mention because it is by far the highest number, and it's very relevant point of concern if we're thinking about depleting water supplies globally. Now, again, notice the connection using however. After this time, both farming, so again, a nice time expression, and then look at the word both and the word and. So that's using that correlative conjunction to emphasize the rapid increase of these two sectors. All right? Throughout the 20th century, the consumption of water for domestic purposes is negligible. Just a little piece of vocabulary there for you. Negligible means that we can neglect it, we can ignore it. Okay? So it's negligible compared with industry or agriculture, although there is an increased rate of consumption in the final 2 decades. So just mentioning that interesting jump in consumption there. All right, Jeffrey, I'm looking at yours. However, since the mid-century, since the mid of the same century, Jeffrey, is a little bit awkward, just mid-century. However, since the mid-century, and use a little hyphen to connect it, so mid-century, okay? However, since the mid-century, the usage of agriculture increased at such a rapid pace that until the new millennium, the number is threefold compared to the beginning of the 20th century. It's a little bit awkward, Jeffrey, because you're saying the new millennium and then you're saying the beginning, and that sounds like you're maybe going back all the way to 1001, the year 1001, which is obviously not in the graph, and it would be very different numbers there. So careful with the wording, okay? A little bit of correction there. Okay, so now we need to connect this with the table, okay? And this is what's really important. So until so far, you know, you might have done an all right job describing these, maybe some grammar mistakes, a couple language use mistakes, but you're still doing okay. You're still getting a band 7, maybe a 7.5. You're doing all right. Now, what do you do with this table? So how do you connect the table to the line graph? Okay, that's the good question here. So that's the golden question. Okay, so the gold question is how should I connect this information to that line graph? Okay, so clearly the connection is with water usage. Okay, don't overcomplicate. So clearly this is showing water usage here, and this is showing water usage here. It's saying water consumption. So now we can say that the table further defines water usage on a national level. Yeah, and Naveen, try to avoid we and us. If you avoid we and us in task 1 and try to use grammar and sentence structure where you don't need to use the words we and us, you'll notice that the essay just sounds much, much better, okay? So it will just read a little bit more smoothly and clearly when you don't involve your audience. So notice how I did that. The table further defines water usage on a national level by comparing Brazil to Congo. Clearly, Brazil. Now here, okay, before I start writing, again, I want to indicate my points of comparison, all right? So what are my points of comparison here? Well, my points of comparison is obviously according to columns, here and here. And here, remember, when you're looking at a table, you should do a little bit of quick math, all right? What is the quick math here, members, that I'm talking about? So what's the quick math? What is the quick math that we're talking about here? What should I figure out very, very quickly when I'm looking at these comparisons in the columns? Naveen, you can. Yeah, you can separate this into two paragraphs for the analysis, but you can just melt it into one as well, as long as you have a nice, strong connection between the information. So the population is roughly 35 times. Yeah, so roughly 35 times. You could say 35, or if you say 30, it's not the end of the world. So you don't have to be perfect here. If you said 30 times, it's okay. You're not going to lose any marks. If you're a little bit closer and you say 35, which is a little bit over, but if you say, I think it's closest to 32, 33. But if you say 35, that's okay too. So that's fine, Jeffrey. Absolutely. So Brazil has 35 times the population of Congo. How much more irrigated land? And if you want to keep that simple and paraphrase it, you can say farmland. So how much more irrigated land or farmland does Brazil have than Congo? Brazil is 26,500 and Congo is 100. What's the multiplier there? Yeah, it's a surprising number. It's a surprising number. 265, absolutely. Not 26, Naveen. Yeah, 265, exactly 265, right? All you have to do is just remove the 2 zeros. And so you take the 2 zeros away, and you get 1 under 265, right? It's very easy. So 265, it's easy to make a mistake there because it's so surprising, the difference. So Brazil has 265 times the farmland or farm area as Congo. All right, and how much more water is used in Brazil than in Congo? So Brazil is 359 cubic meters per person, and Congo is 8 cubic meters per person. So what's the multiplier there? So Jeffrey says that's roughly 44 times. Yeah, roughly. So if you say 40, again, that's totally fine. So if you end up with 30, 265, 40, that's okay. Now, this is quick math, ladies and gentlemen. You only have 20 minutes to write your response for task 1. And of course, again, here, I'm showing you a band 9 response. So you're not thinking so much about your English. You're thinking much more about your language use, your quality of information, your quality of writing, okay? This is band 9. And members have been with us for a while, so you should be fairly familiar now with a lot of the language, and you should be able to focus on this. So notice some interesting differences then. 30 times the population, 265 times the farmland, 40 times the use of water, okay? So we can compare these now very clearly, and we can draw some interesting conclusions, okay? So let's do that now. Again, sorry, I'm going to label this for you. So this is 1, 2, 3, or if we're continuing from the top, of course, this would be 4, 5, 6, and then we can draw a general conclusion about this table and what it's actually showing us, okay? All right, so remember the numbers, 30, 60, or 265, and 40. Okay, I'm just going to keep it simple. If your math is more accurate, Jeffrey, hey, good on you. It'll be even that much more pretty when the examiner reads your response. So, oops, wrong direction. Here we go. All right, so the table, continuing on from here, and write your own here, members. I'm going to be quiet while I'm writing, but we're writing from here. The table further defines water usage on a national level by comparing Brazil to Congo. Clearly, All right. So let's see what you have. Okay, I'll give you a little bit more time here. I know it's not quite as easy. I could only imagine how tough it would be for me to write this in some of the languages that you're speaking, such as Taiwanese or Punjabi or Hindi. So I respect the challenge of the language barrier here as well, but it is important that your information matches closely with mine. So Naveen says, in terms of population, Congo has 5.2 million as opposed to 35 times higher in Brazil. Yeah, go from the big to the small. I mean, we're always, Naveen, more interested in the big than we are in the small. So if you're going to state the number for Brazil. So say in terms of population, Brazil has a population of 176 million, which is 35 times that of Congo. So I think your sentence is okay. I think, again, it's just the information that's a little bit off here. Okay, state Brazil, then state Congo. Okay, it's more interesting than going from small to big. It's a little bit more awkward. All right. Okay, just waiting a little bit more for Jeffrey, or maybe Manisha will throw up a comment here as well. Okay, well, I'm going to read mine for now. Jeffrey, good on you if you're still writing. Don't worry, I will read it once you get it up. So the table further defines water usage on a national level by comparing Brazil to Congo. Clearly, Brazil has 30 times the population as Congo. The drastic difference is in the farmland area, which is 265 times greater in Brazil. This difference in irrigated land is reflected in the per capita usage of water, which is 40 times more for Brazilians. Okay? So again, pushing for that Band 8, Band 9 level. Some good comparison. Notice the adjective clause, which is 265 times greater, okay? So I'm definitely throwing in a little bit of juicy grammar tidbits there for you as well, members. So you have the subordinating conjunction that I showed you before, the usage of the correlative conjunction, now this usage of adjective clause as well, okay? So Jeffrey says, according to the data, the number of citizens of Brazil is 30 times more than Congo. The farmland in Brazil is 250 times that of Congo, so the water used is also higher. We can't assume that it's for farming, even though it's 99% that you're right, Jeffrey, but we don't want to make that assumption, okay, that it's for farming. And we might infer that, so we might say that in our summary, that that's what it is. But I'd be a little bit cautious to be so direct with that, okay? It's not too repetitive, Jeffrey. I think it's quite good, all right? Naveen says, similarly, Brazil has a farmland area of 26,000 square kilometers compared to Congo, which is just 100 square kilometers of farmland. Naveen, be really careful to report the data correctly, okay? Because you will lose marks for incorrect reporting of data, especially if it's on the table in front of you. So 100 square kilometers, okay? Just be cautious of that. And again, Naveen, rather than the raw numbers, so rather than stating the 26,500 and the 100, state the actual comparable difference of 265 times more, or 265 times greater land. Okay, it makes more sense. Your goal here, Naveen, is interpretation of the data. You're not just simply stating data, but you're interpreting data, okay? That's how you get Band 8, Band 9, is you interpret the data into simple language, into clear language for your reader, all right? So this type of a graph where you have this line graph together with this table, this is definitely where I would add in a summary, okay? So what can we summarize here? So when we look at this data of the line graph, and we've already said in the overview that agriculture is way more, we don't need to necessarily repeat that. And then we look at it on a national level. What can we state in the summary? So what is a quality piece of information that we can summarize, that we can conclude from comparing the line graph to the table and leave our reader with this valuable insight into what we've learned or what we've gained here? What is that? So what have we gained here? What have we learned by going through the line graph and going through the table? And ladies and gentlemen, of course, in the IELTS, in 20 minutes, you have to be able to do this very quickly. You might be thinking, hi, Adrian's crazy. There's no way somebody can write this information in 20 minutes. It's not true. I would say that a native-speaking high school student in the US or Canada, I can speak especially for Canadians because I'm Canadian, and I can tell you that my classmates in grade 12, now I'm jumping back a few years, I know, but they would be, the students in my grade 12 who had, higher scores in the top, let's say 20% of the class, they could analyze and write a response to this line graph and table just like what we're doing here in 10 minutes. Okay, so half the time in 10 minutes, maximum 15. So that means that if somebody has fairly good English skills and they understand what they're doing, they should also be able to do this in 20 minutes. Okay. The clear summary here, and it's, Naveen, I really respect what you just did. You said you're not sure about the summary, and that's very respectable. It's absolutely okay to say, I don't know, all right? I think that's one of the problems in the world today is people are too shy to say, I don't know. It's something I try to practice in my life as well, as when I'm not sure about something, just telling people, I don't know. The summary, what I would state here is that water usage definitely varies between countries, as is depicted here with Brazil and Congo. And we can infer that the more irrigated land, so the more farming activity, the higher usage of water per person in that country. So that's what I would write for my summary, okay? My summary would look like this. In summary, the combined information in this line graph and table shows that water usage per person varies among countries. Furthermore, it may be inferred that the more agricultural activity or industry in a country, the more water is used on average. Okay, so that's how you could summarize that. Now, is that going to be 150 words? Yeah, I bet you that's probably closer to 220 words or so. Again, remember, Band 9, according to IELTS, is an expert user of English. It's somebody who can absolutely write very well. This type of question with this line graph and table, it's not the easiest one to get for a task 1 question. It could happen, so be prepared. Make sure you know what you're doing. Let's read this now together, see how it looks, hear how it sounds. Read with me nice and loud. So the line graph illustrates the global usage of water in 3 main sectors: agriculture, industry, and residential, while the table depicts more specific data for 2 countries, Brazil and Congo, in the year 2000. I would probably just write the number for this. At first glance, it is quite clear that agriculture has much higher usage of water historically than industry or domestic. Also, the table clearly depicts that Brazil is much greater in all three data than Congo. When looking at the line graph in more detail, it is noticeable that both agriculture and industry maintained a steady increase in water usage until the middle of the 20th century. At that point, agriculture had reached roughly 1,000 cubic kilometers of usage. However, after this time, both farming and industry rapidly increased consumption of water. By the end of the millennium, agriculture had tripled its need of water to 3,000 cubic kilometers. Throughout the 20th century, the consumption of water for domestic purposes is negligible compared with industry or agriculture, although there is a notable increase in the rate of consumption in the final 2 decades from 1980 to 2000. The table further defines water usage on a national level by comparing Brazil to Congo. Clearly, Brazil has 30 times the population as Congo. The drastic difference is in the farmland area, which is 265 times greater in Brazil. This difference in irrigated land is reflected in the per capita usage of water, which is 40 times more for Brazilians. In summary, the combined information in this line graph and table shows that water usage per person varies among countries. Furthermore, it may be inferred that the more agricultural industry in a country, the more water is used on average. Okay. All right. So that is your completed Band 9 Task 1 for this line graph table. If you don't write all this, if you have a few points missing, a couple sentences a little bit more simple or simpler, you can still get a very nice band, perhaps even a 9, as long as you're grammatically accurate. All right, Jeffrey, Naveen, thank you so much for your contribution today. Do you have any questions about this and what I just did? So any questions about this line graph table combination and how I just explained what to do? Thanks, Jeffrey. I appreciate that from you. It's very respectable. I tip my hat to you, sir. Any questions? So not really. I went into a lot of detail there, so it should be fairly clear. Naveen, how are you doing? Okay. There was definitely some valuable advice there, I think, for both of you, so make sure to listen back to that if you forget or if you're wondering what those were. Thank you to all of our viewers. I do realize that there were a lot of people watching. That's great. I hope everybody learned some valuable information from today's lesson. Again, for lots and lots of IELTS help and for great strategies and examples so that you can get those high band scores, visit us at aehelp.com for academic IELTS. That's academicenglishhelp.com. And for general IELTS, go to gieltshelp.com. Visit us there. Thank you, Naveen. I appreciate your compliment. Have a wonderful day, you two. Have a wonderful rest of your day, viewers. Sweet dreams to those of you where it's late in your country. I know it's quite late in India and probably even more late in Taiwan. So bye for now. Sleep tight. Don't let the bed bugs bite, as they say. Wake up tomorrow refreshed, ready to tackle another day. Bye for now. Fist bump to you as well, Jeffrey.